YouTube, what's going on, what's happening. As always, I am Hadou, and I've been having thoughts about Gear 6 lately. Probably seen coming up in the news how they're talking about the Marcus Phoenix collection that we thought was going to come with the remastered old games, and then turns out we don't think it's actually a thing. So it just had me thinking about Gears and the future of Gears, and specifically kind of where the next game's going to take us. I made a video already about things we wanted to see in Gear 6, but now I'm thinking more what's the story going to be about, and just what are some of the things that we kind of want explained in the story of the next game to kind of just help clear things up and ultimately give us some closure on some items also. So without further ado, here are 6 things we want to know in the Gear 6 campaign storyline. So this first one is just something that came up when I was looking back in the Gear story, and touches pretty much on Anya's life. You know, between Gears 3 and Gears 4, Anya kind of steps back from the front lines, and her and Marcus have JD, and she also kind of heads up this initiative with Jinn to essentially study and try to work on repopulating the human race, you know, after the locusts are what they thought to be killed off essentially. So in the first few games, it kind of seems like Anya is more involved in the war, whether it's her giving directions behind the headset, or if it's her fighting alongside the group. And then they suddenly kill her off, and you know, they have some collectibles that talk about her, but that's pretty much it. I mean, obviously Anya wasn't on the front lines fighting as much as Marcus or Cole and Dom and Baird, but she was still pretty important to the overall success of defeating the locusts. And I just feel like some more flashbacks of, you know, their life after the war, her in the fertility program thing, trying to help, you know, humanity revive itself, and overall maybe tie her into some kind of crisis of humanity that Jinn has if she's a part of the next story. You know, she seems really authoritarian and kind of maybe not one of the good guys, so maybe tie it into her having some flashbacks of Anya trying to teach her the right way and guide her through her story however she contributes. Just something to give a nice tribute to Anya, since she was part of the OG squad, and you know, if this is the last game, it'd be a nice send-off, at least I think. This next one is kind of straightforward, since it's really essentially the main storyline of the new Gears trilogy, but in general, I'm curious what the future is for Kait and her overall bloodline, since when you get through Gears 5, you kind of learn that Kait's mom, Reyna, was the daughter of Queen Mira, and essentially Kait was supposed to be the next queen, and you know, she, I think, severed her link to the mind, or the hive mind, and just there's a lot of stuff kind of broken down in the last game especially, and it just makes you wonder where the game's going in general. Queen Reyna, they call her, who's now the new Locust Queen essentially. She's kind of a bad guy, but it's not like she was really present in the last game, so you wonder how is she gonna operate going forward. Is she gonna have generals and commanders kind of like Queen Mira had back in the old games? And then you wonder what Kait's kind of role in all this is, especially if she's already severed from the hive mind. You would imagine her new responsibility is to take out her mom, so that more or less will probably be the main idea of the storyline. But maybe there's a twist. Maybe she decides to somehow work with Jinn to actually reconnect her mind to the hive mind and learn to control it in a good way or something. I don't know. Just kind of throwing things out there. But I just wonder what the future is and how they can make it interesting for the most part. Now that Kait is essentially the main character and her mom is the main villain, so just whatever they do with the next story, somehow giving it an interesting aspect of it, especially when in Gears 5 you gave Kait the ability to command, you know, different locusts and stuff when unfortunately she killed her uncle. Maybe it'd be cool if she had the ability to control them in a positive way. Of course, there's probably plenty of issues with that as far as the locusts coexisting after the fact, but just something interesting to kind of throw out there. Let me know what you guys think. So another one that's actually really commented about and requested as far as maybe a DLC in the next game, is a lot more insight into the UIR experiences, particularly early on in the war, when they were fighting against the Cog and maybe even some Locust stuff. This one was mentioned a lot in the comments of my what we want to see in Gear 6 video. So they don't talk a whole lot about it. Obviously they have the chapter in Gears 5 where you're going through the the red sand area, Basgar and all that stuff, and you're essentially trying to launch the Hammer of Dawn satellite back into space. But there's some more stuff that they could have expanded on. I think there's a lot in the comics, especially, where they show a lot of the interactions between the Cog and the UIR soldiers early on, and they did include a fair share of collectibles in Gears 5. But just thinking about some of the UIR things you could throw in there, maybe show what it was like before they had the Hammer of Dawn stolen, show the civilization, kind of show some Paddock footage, how he came through the ranks, and then kind of fast forward it and tie him into how he's now transformed from hating the Cog into now working side by side with the Cog. Just throwing that into a cool moment that, I don't know, having fight next to Baird or Cole or something. It seemed like there's a lot of interest in the UIR, just how they came up, show their force, show their experience fighting the Locust and the Cog and fighting over the emotion. And that seems like if they can tie it into the story, at least in some way, it would definitely be interesting, especially if you're trying to paint Jinn and the Cog now in a darker light. You could show a side of the Cog from the UIR perspective that maybe we didn't get to see, that kind of showed how the Cog made some decisions early on that essentially showed them as the bad guy to some people. You could even do a whole Pendulum Wars DLC from the UIR perspective. I think that was something I saw mentioned a lot too. Not sure how it would tie into the Gear 6 story necessarily, but especially if it's a DLC, it could just be a whole flashback that really just gives another perspective into the Gears lore that will really, I think, please a lot of the fans from a game perspective who might not have read the comics. This next one maybe is just something I kind of thought up on my own, but I was wondering, as far as Commander Jinn, or I forget her specific role, as far as Jinn is concerned, how is she gonna play into the next game's story? I mean, in Gears 4 and Gears 5, you see she's totally on the, she leads the Cog and her decisions are pretty questionable. It doesn't seem like she has much empathy in general, especially because she was willing to try to reconnect Kait to the hive mind regardless of the consequences. So, it makes you wonder, is she gonna be a bad guy in the next game? Is she maybe gonna even try to sabotage Kait and turn her over to the Locust or Queen Reyna in some weird coup that, essentially tries to get her what she wants, and then she ends up kind of screwing over things? Or that's another thing just kind of throwing out there. But she seems to come and go randomly. Sometimes it's hard to identify the specific villain in the story in these games, but it seems like she could either be a definite force for good or a force for evil. And good, obviously, in the sense that she would contribute all of the DBs and her whole Cog force, in some huge Locust war, which would be crazy, especially on like an Unreal Engine 5, to have like a whole battlefield full of Locusts and Onyx guards and everybody fighting. That would be crazy. But still yet to be seen how she would contribute, and I feel like she at least might be kind of an unexpected thing you could throw into the story to, like I mentioned, maybe try to sabotage Kait at the beginning because she thinks that's what is right for trying to take advantage in the war. And then, especially because, again, she came up under Anya, it'd be cool to throw some kind of struggle between good and evil, at least internally. It'd be kind of out of the blue because it hasn't come up yet, but just trying to throw out some themes out there that would, give some character development, at least to some degree, on some people that we might not see a whole lot and seem to have positions of power that could be pretty important to the story. So this next one is probably the one that everybody kind of thinks of in regards to the obvious cliffhanger at the end of Gears 5, and that's what impact your decision to save JD or Dell will have on the actual story on the next game. So if you got to the end of Gears 5, you know that there's a big fight where there's Queen Reyna talking to Kait, and then she grabs Dell and JD and holds them up, and you have to decide which one you're going to save. Whoever you don't decide ends up dying. And depending on that, you get a different ending where Marcus is either sad about his son dying, or, you know, he's sad about Dell dying, of course. When you think about what that means, it makes me wonder to what extent it's gonna affect two potentially different storylines as far as what TC will do in the story. And you think about the main characters. So when you think about the main squad, there's Kait. Obviously, you can consider Marcus in there because it directly impacts him to some degree. And then you can throw Faz in there too, since he'll probably take somewhat of a bigger role in the next game. So assuming that it's gonna have a minor impact on the direction that one story could go versus another, you could say that maybe Kait just has to struggle throughout the game with the consequences of her decision, and really it's just more or less the voice lines are changed as she, you know, kind of grieves and kind of blames herself for the things that happen. You know, you would have it go from JD and her reminiscing about JD, or you have it go to Dell and really her interactions with Dell in Gears 5 or something. That's just thinking if they didn't want to do a whole lot of variation where this one decision drove this one story and then the other one drove a completely different experience. It would be cool, but obviously it would be extensive as far as creating that side of the campaign. But if they did do something, there's probably a lot you can theorize, so maybe that's a separate video I'll do if you guys want to see just kind of ways that the next story could go as far as that decision. But it makes me wonder, especially if this is the last game in the franchise, let's say, or at least this trilogy, what that'll do for people like Marcus, let's say. Because let's say you kill JD, Marcus has now lost so many people, including his best friend, his wife, and now his son, all in the midst of fighting the Locusts and being part of the COG. So especially if you're trying to make a callback to a real iconic moment where Dom sacrifices himself, maybe Marcus puts it on himself to say, I need to end this once and for all, and somehow he just goes out in a blaze of glory in order to save the team, or he, for some reason, sees Kait as the future going forward, and he decides to sacrifice himself for Kait. You know, obviously that would ruffle a lot of feathers, I think, in the Gears community, but just thinking about ways that you could progress that story in a way where Marcus, again, has lost people very close to him the same way Dom lost Maria, and it really eats away at him until he just says, all right, if this is how we finish it, I'm going to finish it. And it's hard to theorize about Dell because Dell is kind of, I consider him comic relief throughout a lot of the story. He obviously is kind of Kate's conscience in Gears 5, but he's not directly responsible for a whole lot. His role is more support than direct. So obviously it'll influence JD and how he goes forward, and obviously Kait if she's, you know, without her Gears 5 companion. But it's harder to think about Dell. Either way, I think Faz steps in to take the place of whoever you didn't end up saving, and he'll either try to give more comic relief or he'll try to step in as maybe support as the other characters grieve. And then, you know, maybe in the midst of Dell dying, JD actually kind of puts it on himself to sacrifice himself to save the rest of his team or something. I don't know if that's something they would even entertain, but you kind of see in Gears 5 where JD will kind of go out of his way to be a cowboy and try to save the day, where he was doing the whole Hammer of Dawn thing and it ended up killing Lizzie. So it's not outside of his character, I would say, to do risky things. And there's probably a level of JD that'll come into play with character development also, because, you know, as he grows as a character and kind of comes out of this COG character to develop more of his conscience, you know, maybe that plays in more in the next story. You know, there's a lot of different possibilities, but let me know what you guys think in the comments as far as what you think that decision will do as far as how it impacts what happens in the next story. This last one is something that, you know, I at least think about as far as the role that the OG characters play And that's just what's going to happen to those characters in the next game. You know, who's going to survive, who will the coalition think end up killing off, you know, just what'll happen. Let's say like they save the world from the locusts, you know, what's their going forward, what's their story going to be. Marcus, for example, is he going to survive, you know, or is he going to end up sacrificing himself in order to end the locusts as we know them? Will he end up taking a role in the cog, even though he hates them, but he figures he needs to kind of be the driving force that puts them in a different direction, maybe? Or maybe he just completely goes off the map again because, again, if you, let's say, kill JD, he decides he doesn't want anything to do with any of this, and he ends the war, and then he says, I'm going off the radar. Or Cole, for example. Does Cole retire? Does he stay to help train recruits? Does he start up the new Thrashball League? Just little stuff like that. You can go to, like, Baird, for example. Maybe you can tie in the UIR thing with Baird, because you see Baird has some kind of relationship with Paddock. So let's say Baird decides to help continue the efforts that the UIR drove with the cosmonaut work and trying to get things into space, into the moons of Sarah. And, you know, that's how he uses his technological experience to, I guess, just go forward in the story. Obviously trying to help rebuild what was destroyed, but also trying to establish life on other worlds, you know, not too far from what the kind of stuff we talk about in, you know, everyday life here. And then you got the Carmines, of course, like Clayton Carmine. Is he training recruits? Is he opening a family business for weapons and armor and all kinds of stuff, you know? Those are the kind of questions I would like at least to see more of in Gear 6, because I think so far the OG characters, while old, of course, have played a real backseat role. But, you know, especially because I think a lot of us are more invested in and relate more with the OG characters. You know, I'd like to see them at least more engaged or really taking more impact directly versus kind of having them in the back in little bits and pieces and letting, you know, Kait and the others drive 90% of the story or so. You know, I just think it'd be a cool way, especially if this is the last game, to really send off these characters in a way that honors what the first few games did for the story and kind of how they built up their stories also. Even you can tie in Dom, you know, even though Dom's not here anymore, you can just try to, like Anya, give him his acknowledgement throughout the story and have it really be like a send-off game that ties up loose ends, you know, brings in the old characters with the new characters and really, you know, sells the game as the final game, the finale. And that's it as far as the things I think information-wise we want a little more clarity on in Gear 6. I think Gears 5 definitely did a really good job at tying in a lot of things as far as the connection to the locusts and just bringing the new games in relation to the old games. And also even a lot of the collectibles. If you were like me and you're just an achievement head and you really wanted to get all the collectibles and stuff throughout the story, they actually gave a lot of interesting insights. Some of them were more just trying to help build the environment, but other stuff actually was pretty interesting in, you know, world building and just character building stuff too. And again, any opportunity to tie in stuff from the comics to make a more well-rounded lore in Gear 6 itself, I think is just a good opportunity. So these are just some thoughts I had. Really, it's kind of more discussion. So let me know in the comments, did you guys like the points I made? What's kind of on your mind? You know, drop a comment about what you think you want to know more about in the Gear 6 story. I'm interested to see, you know, just kind of what we want tied into this game, especially if this is really the last of this storyline we're going to get. And yeah, you know, share this with your friends. And just let me know what you guys think, because who knows, maybe some of this stuff will end up in the next game and, you know, throw out an idea. You never know, TC picks up on it or something. So as always, thank you guys for the support. I appreciate it for watching, and talk to you guys next time. Take care.